I don't know. I mean, I guess it just seems like part of the real problem here is the degree to which we just begin with a separation. It seems like people do when they try to think about the stuff. You know, they seem it's as if in the history of philosophy there's this long history where people either think that the task is to somehow get reality into the body, whether it's through the senses or into the mind, but somehow reality's outside you, and then the task is to get it in. Or people assume that, again, they take the assumption as a sort of granted that we're separate. And then they say, well, how do I get outside of my body? How do I get outside of my head and get access to the order that's there? Now, I think this maybe bears upon some of the questions or the issues that people have been raising about the problem of intention and where is intention. Certainly, yeah, I don't grow my hair. We say it just happens. I don't circulate my blood. We say that it just happens. I don't digest my food. We say that it just happens, and yet I have some decision over what I choose to eat, or at least I seem to by cultural standards. These kinds of ambiguities we want to recognize. I think there is a larger metaphysical issue, despite any of the answers that we want to give to those particulars, particularly about the issue of volition, and we could talk at length about all of that. The real question is, from where comes the division? From where comes the separation that makes us think that we're one thing and the world is something else? Um, when you look at someone else, when you just look at them, they look like they're a figure against a background. You see like the whole of them. But if you take yourself as the example, you never experience yourself that way. You don't experience yourself as a whole against a background. If anything, you experience the continuity between you and the world. The world rolls outwardly from your headlessness, right? It's like everybody has a face but you. I mean, look around. Where your head isn't or where your face isn't, the world has been made room for. Yeah, we're the way the world makes room for itself. We're places and moments of self-negating earth. Where does that self-negation come from? I mean, I don't have the answer. I wish I did. But it seems like somehow the universe made. Let's try it this way. There's an old riddle that says one thing could not exist. And then people say that there couldn't be just one thing because if there were just one thing, that one thing's boundaries couldn't be registered. And so it's sort of like what's not the thing enables the thing to perceive itself, recognize itself, distinguish itself. You can do this with all kinds of basic Gestalt psychology. It seems to be a sort of metaphysical problem. Well, then the question would be, how was the universe as a totality able to make the room for the separations between itself? Now, somebody might say, well, the universe isn't a whole. It's a parts without a whole, right? There's this Portuguese poet who says, yeah, that's the mystery of nature, right? Nature is a parts without a whole. I don't. I think even there, if we say nature is a parts without a whole, look at the paradox we're caught in because we're always able to imagine a whole of which there are parts. Somehow, this capacity for internal divisiveness was metaphysically made possible by the cosmos. Now, here, someone might suggest a kind of agency that I'm giving to the cosmos, as if the cosmos, by an act of volition, introduced negation. No, that would already presuppose the negation. You see? No, I'm not doing that. I think the question is, um, everything is related to everything else. Okay, let's start there. Let's go to complex systems theory. It seems like everything is related to everything else. Well, if that's the case, where are the particular relations that identify what something is not? I think the human world lives in a world of distinguishing what is not the case. Now, somebody said something about Crocs and this kind of stuff. I think it would take a great amount of discussion here, but I think if we make the distinction between analog communication and digital communication, we could do this. Anthony Wilden's brilliant book, System and Structure, he lays out the distinction between analog and digital communication. And I think what he's trying to suggest here is that the analog is the world of concrete differences. There are differences, but notice the differences are always embedded and contextualized as continuous, contiguous relations. You go from one thing to the next to the next. When you move into digital communication, you find discrete distinctions, and here these distinctions, as they become subject to verbal digitalization, right? The spoken word is a kind of digitalization of the analogic sounds that are coming out of my mouth. Right now there's a continuous flow of differences, that is the sounds that you're hearing, but that seems to be very different than the distinctions of particular words that you're able to hear within that. If you look at Daniel Dennett's Consciousness Explained, he even shows that the lowest output of acoustical sound doesn't necessarily line up with the boundaries between words. What this tells us is that the distinctions are eidetic, they're not empirical. Again, I'm really asking a question. Where comes the very separation? From where comes the very divisiveness that allows us to ask such a question as how do we get access to the world, or how do we get the world in our head, or how do we get out of ourselves? The question of how am I not the world, how am I a way that the world is able to haunt itself as another, questions from where comes the divisiveness by which an organism recognizes that it's not the total world around it. What is the meaning of dreamless sleep? Every night each of us gives up on all of the distinctions, all the divisions between ourselves and the world around us. Each one of us becomes undifferentiated. Who are we while we dreamlessly sleep, and what does that have to say? Isn't consciousness itself a kind of ontological divisiveness? And the truth of living is more like dreamless sleep. To be awake is to suffer the original fracture. It's the break. This is what Sartre means by the for itself, haunting the in itself as another. Somehow a process of internal negation, which is consciousness, emerged in nature. I want to get at that.